Good evening. My name is William Higginbottom, and I live on Station Road, New Whittington. I have just entered my 80th year, though I am told I don't look it, and I am still, I am glad to say, hale and hearty. I was sitting outside my cottage door the other evening, in company with my unfailing friend the Pipe, when a gentleman from the Derbyshire Times came to call. He wanted to hear something of the old days. Well, I am not a man who needs much persuading on that score. I was born in Sheffield in 1831, one of a family of 22. Rather a tall order, as I told him with a chuckle. Now, you will be surprised to know that I walked, when a little chap, all the way from Sheffield with my father on holiday time, to be christened at the parish church here in Old Whittington. In those days, they were not so particular about early christenings. We had relatives living here, and after the ceremony was over, I was left to stay with my uncle, Joseph Hartley, who resided at the Poplars. It was at my uncle's house, and from there I went to school each day until I was turned 12 years of age. How well I remember that old school. It stood near the entrance gates of the churchyard, Webster's Endowed Grammar School, as it was known. Founded long before my time for the education of the poorest children of the parish. A noble intention, and one this village has good reason to be proud of. But I had greater reason to remember its master than the building itself. One Maddock by name. He was a very stern and severe man, and I, along with many others, often came under the ban of his displeasure. During the time I was there, the school had 3 masters, the Mr. Maddock I have spoken of, then a Mr. Rowe, and then Mr. Cantrill, who was father of the present Mr. William Cantrill, who still resides in Old Whittington. You must remember that at that time the village stocks stood near the church. It was no uncommon thing to see in these, on Sundays, some poor fellow who had been imbibing too freely on the previous night. By the more respectable folk, the offender was looked at askance, while he did not escape the unwelcome attentions of the more mischievous youths of the village, who often teased him unmercifully when a prisoner. I confess, the mischievous youths were not entirely strangers to me. The church itself was an old building, very low. How long it had stood there I cannot speak with authority, but I know as a boy it was easy enough to climb up onto the roof and rob the sparrows' and jackdaws' nests. The clerk and sexton in my time was old Joe Onions. This worthy had a habit during sermon time of frequently falling asleep, and then suddenly waking up and drawling out very solemnly, "Amen." On one occasion, Parson Robinson called down from the pulpit, "Hold thee noise, Joseph. I haven't finished yet." These irregularities on the part of Joseph caused withering looks from some of the elders, while to the younger members of the congregation, myself included, they were a source of considerable laughter and tittering. The Mr. Robinson I speak of lived at the rectory hard by, and served this parish faithfully for nearly 50 years, rarely leaving it, and giving himself entirely to the people here. He was only in charge, mind you. The living itself was held by the Reverend George Gordon, who resided at Croydon. The living was worth £300 a year, and Mr. Robinson received only £60 per annum for doing all the work. He was a good old man. Many a time I have heard of him giving away his dinner and going without. He it was who married and buried my father and my mother. When my mother was buried, Mr. Robinson was very ill, and another clergyman, who was, I am sorry to say, too fond of his glass, was doing duty for him. He was the worse for drink that day, and I recollect Mr. Robinson having to be fetched, ill as he was, from the rectory in a bath chair, to complete the ceremony. Did you know that Old Whittington had been the scene of a murder? It occurred in Church Street, where a woman named Green was murdered by her son-in-law, a worthless sort of fellow named Oxley. His chief aim always seemed to be to get money from the old lady, and one afternoon he sent his wife away to Eckington on some pretence. Taking advantage of her absence, he entered the kitchen while Mrs. Green was at work in a kneeling attitude, cut her throat, and hurried off. Very fortunately, she was not murdered outright, but lived some hours. In the evening, Oxley appeared on the scene again, pretending to be horrified at the outrage. The dying woman, though unable to speak, recognized him in the room, and shook her fist in his direction. This aroused suspicion, He was placed under arrest and taken to Chesterfield. But the law did not take its proper course, for remorse seizing Oxley at the terrible crime he had committed caused him to hang himself by means of his braces in the cell where he had been lodged. From Whittington, I was sent to the Park Academy in Nottingham to improve upon my village education. Then I began my working life, apprenticed to engine fitting at the works of Messrs. Davy Brothers in Sheffield, then as a fireman at the Midland Passenger Station in Nottingham. My father at that time had a great deal to do with various railway contracts, including that of the Erewash Valley. Profiting by this experience, he went out to Rotterdam with the family, having signed a 5 years contract for similar work. We were there when the Crimean War broke out. The contractor died in the meantime, the full terms were not adhered to, and my father returned to England, leaving me behind, where I stayed 15 more months. I shall always remember the fondness of the Dutch boys for smoking. When let loose from school, ready recourse was made to the pipe. I found myself quite at home in that respect. My father, during these years, had carried out work under the supervision of George Stephenson himself, the great engineer. I remember him coming one day into the cutting between Whittington and Staveley, where I had gone with my father. He took hold of my hand and made me walk the rails for some considerable distance. That was not yesterday, I can tell you. It would be about 1855 that New Whittington began to show real signs of extending. Firth's Works had just been built, and my father built the Wellington Hotel and became its first landlord. Now, a visitor to that house in those days was a man who would later become one of the most notorious criminals in Victorian England. His name was Charles Peace. Now, Charles Peace was born in Sheffield in 1832, the son of a shoemaker who later travelled with a circus as a lion tamer. As a boy of 14, Peace suffered a terrible accident in a steelworks, a red-hot rod passing through his leg, leaving him with a permanent limp. During his long recovery, he learned to play the violin and became extraordinarily accomplished. He was known as the modern Paganini, but Peace had another life entirely. Between prison sentences for burglary, he operated across South Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire, charming, sociable, always with his violin case to hand. Sometimes, it was said, he carried his burglary tools inside it. In 1876, he shot dead a man named Arthur Dyson at Banner Cross in Sheffield, the husband of a neighbour with whom he had become obsessed. He fled to London, assumed a false identity, and continued burgling for 2 more years before his capture. He was hanged at Armley Jail in Leeds on the 25th of February, 1879. In those earlier days, before any of that was known, he used to come to our hotel and play his violin. A most accomplished player, I will grant him that. His boast in those days was that he always made it a point never to rob the poor. That hotel my father built still stands on the same spot today in New Whittington, though it has not been a pub for some years now. Every time I passed it, I thought of those evenings, and of Charles Peace with his fiddle, and wondered what my father would have made of it all. With the opening of Sheepbridge Works, I became one of their engine drivers on the branch line which served their collieries, the Devonshire, Monkwood and Cobnerwood pits, which gave employment to a great many hands. In 1870, this line was transferred to the Midland Railway Company, and I became one of their employees. I stayed with them some 35 years. And on my retirement in 1905, which, let me say, was not compulsory, I was presented with a timepiece by my colleagues. The presentation was made to me at the Bull's Head, Old Whittington, a good place for it. My visitor asked me whether I did not find time hanging heavily on my hands after so busy and varied a career. Not at all, I told him. I take steady walks, I smoke a good deal, and I do a deal of reading. My sight is still good, and only when the gas is lit do I fetch out my glasses. I am William Higginbottom, of Station Road, New Whittington. I hope you have enjoyed a glimpse of this village as it once was, of the school by the churchyard gates, of old Joe Onions in the stocks and the pew, of the dying woman who shook her fist, of the great engineer who made a small boy walk the rails, and of the violin-playing murderer who sat in my father's hotel and told us he never robbed the poor. This village has seen some things, and I am glad to have lived to remember them.